people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. We now know who unified light flyweight champion Evelyn Bermudez is going to be facing a week from now, Saturday, the 23rd of this month. She's going to be taking on seasoned veteran of Venezuela, Altuve. This is a better fight, I'd say, than I originally anticipated. I anticipated a Chinese woman with an upside-down record, maybe some losses in the double digits. I have to say, this is a better fight than I was expecting.
Oh yeah, she's gonna make Evelyn work.
Altuve sports a professional record of 13 wins, 3 losses, no draws with 11 knockouts. Those 3 losses that she suffered, those were 3 losses to quality fighters, quality opponents. She lost the decision 2 times to reigning
IBF flyweight champion of Argentina, Leonela Paula Judica.
They fought 2 times, and Leonela Paula Judica beat Altuve both times. That was way back when, in 2018. Though that's not saying that Altuve didn't make the reigning champion work for it. She did.
Those were some close calls.
Close fights. She dropped her last time that they fought in the 3rd round. She made Leonela Paula Judica work for it, and I think she's going to make Evelyn Bermudez work for it. Evelyn,
who's already seen action 2 times this year. This will be her 3rd fight in the year of 2022.
She fought Yalitza Perez in January of this year at the start. More recently, she took on Deborah Rengifo in March.
And Altuve is a step up in class, a step up in competition from those fighters.
She can certainly give Evelyn Bermudez more resistance than Deborah Rengifo did. I don't think she'll be overwhelmed by Evelyn Bermudez's come-forward aggression, her volume punching. If anything, she'll be happy to engage her because they have that in common. They both have a mean streak. Altuve was last in action in April of this year.
Both fighters have seen action in the last 12 months, though comparatively, Evelyn's been fighting better fighters than Yadineth has.
And it's noticeable. Yadineth is a capable fighter, make no mistake, but her quality of competition the last 3 fights has been very poor. Girls with upside-down records, more losses than victories.
She's a capable fighter up until a certain point, up until a certain level.
She can definitely make things interesting against Evelyn Bermudez, though you will notice that in all 3 of Yadineth Altuve's world title attempts, she came up short. She fell just short of the mark.
Yadineth Altuve, who's a mid-range to inside fighter, that's her sweet spot. She's a decent-sized puncher. She has power. Good work rate, too.
Quality backhand. I think the drawback for a fighter like Yadineth Altuve, who has some virtues, has some finer qualities, is perhaps she's too offensively minded.
Things get really scrappy in her fights.
Whereas she's getting off her shots, but so is the other fighter, so is the other girl. That's what we saw in the Judica fights. That's what we saw in the Areli Musinho fight. It's not that Yadineth Altuve doesn't have good offense, it's that she could do with some fine-tuning, some defense.
To help separate her from the other girl.
But I will say, given that she's fighting a come-forward, aggressive pressure fighter, a fighter with a mean streak like she's got a mean streak, this promises to be an all-action fight, and at times, it might be hard to separate Evelyn Bermudez from Yadineth Altuve. Evelyn, she'll throw that 1-2 from the outside coming in, but the work gets kind of messy after that. It gets scrappy with Evelyn the same way it gets scrappy with Yadineth.
Yadineth is the away fighter, hailing from Venezuela.
Whereas the reigning unified light flyweight champion Evelyn Bermudez will have home field advantage, as she often does. Most, if not all, of her fights take place in her native Argentina. So if you see a situation to where the round is close,
just assume that Evelyn Bermudez nicks it because she she's the one with home field advantage.
If I'm being honest, while both fighters are offensively minded fighters, Evelyn Bermudez's offense is a little better than Yarineth Altuve's. The way she leans off to her left to get off that overhand right, the way she sneaks in left hooks in the exchange.
She bends at the waist a little more than Yarineth Altuve. Bends that torso.
To the eye, she might have a slight speed advantage. Nothing dramatic, but I think she has faster hands than Yarineth Altuve does. And
one thing you want to be mindful of whenever an Argentinian fighter is involved
is that they are notoriously tough fighters. Argentinian fighters, particular to this conversation, Argentinian sluggers are not only known for taking a great punch, but delivering one as well. They are notoriously tough, heavy-handed fighters. Daniela Bermudez comes from a fighting family, lest we forget who her older sister is, the very decorated Daniela Bermudez.
The fighting Bermudez sisters, Daniela, Evelyn, and Roxana.
Yarineth Altuve, a veteran of 16 professional contests, 16 professional bouts, 13 wins, 3 losses, and no draws. She's never been stopped. She's an offensively minded fighter with a decent-sized punch, but so is Daniela Bermudez, and this ain't her first rodeo. She's not some squirrely amateur. She's been a champion since 2018.
She's made 5 successful defenses of the IBF light flyweight title so far.
She's had 6 fights since winning it in 2018 overall, though only 5 of those fights were official.
Only 5 of those 6 fights were official defenses of that IBF light flyweight title.
Given that both fighters are offensively minded fighters, neither one has ever been stopped. Hell, Evelyn Bermudez hasn't lost a fight. I'm going to go with Evelyn, and I'm going to go with Evelyn to win on points. I think she's more capable of separating herself from Yarineth Altuve, and lest we forget, Evelyn's got home field advantage. This fight is taking place in her neck of the woods next week, Saturday, on the 23rd.
Conservatively, I'll go with Evelyn to win on points, though I don't rule out a knockout because both fighters are offensively minded fighters.
So any way you slice it, I am going with Evelyn Bermudez, this division's reigning unified champion, to hang on to those 2 alphabet titles.
Tank, look like Tank, same Tank in every fight, but I don't really even want to keep talking about Tank because I feel like at this point, if you're not asking Tank about me, I can't really answer no more questions about him because at the end of the day, I ain't going to keep saying his name. I feel like a lot of these reporters keep using his name and my name in the same sentence. I don't know if it's to build a fight or to build something else up. I don't know what's going on, but I'm not going to keep saying
For sure.
Tank name in no interview with a reporter because of the fact that if y'all not going to ask Tank about me, then I can't keep saying his name at all anyway.
That's the most adequate response to whenever the subject of Gervonta Davis is broached. And it's important to note that Shakur Stevenson, he didn't take a shot at Tank. He didn't say anything derogatory about him. He just doesn't feel that the onus to answer questions about potential fight between them is on him. That if you want to ask
somebody about that fight, ask Gervonta Davis about that fight.
Because if you keep asking Shakur Stevenson about that fight, more interviews involving Shakur Stevenson, the name of Gervonta Davis keeps coming out, it starts to look a certain way. It starts to look like he's trying to ride that guy's wave, like he's the one name-dropping him, when in reality, it's the interviews. It's the media that keeps bringing up this subject, not Shakur Stevenson himself. And for what it's worth, given that Floyd Mayweather, who promotes Gervonta Davis, is urging Devin Haney and Shakur Stevenson to leave Gervonta Davis alone, to fight each other.
How many fucking times do we got to go through this?
There is a subsect of fight fans who want to elevate Gervonta Davis to being the face of boxing, or at minimum, one of the faces of boxing, one of the faces in it. They want him to be a bigger star.
They want him to be a bigger star than he actually is, but they don't seem to want him to fight anybody.
They don't keep the energy for Gervonta Davis and who he should be fighting that they keep for Canelo Alvarez. When it comes to Canelo, they want him to fight fighters on every side of the street there is. The top-ranked side, the Matchroom side, and of course, the PBC side. But that same energy, that same principle, that same expectation doesn't seem to apply to Gervonta Davis.
How many times do we got to go through this shit?
I've said it before many times, and I'll say it again here and now. Gervonta Davis is not a part of the world of boxing so much as he's parallel to it.
He is to the sport of boxing what the Harlem Globetrotters are to the NBA.
It's the best parallel I can come up with, because one is an actual sport, one is an actual competitive sport, and the other is merely a spectacle, an attraction.
And that's all that Gervonta Davis aspires to be. He's not trying to be a full-fledged champion or a unified or undisputed champion.
You know, he's not trying to win those belts off of Devin Haney. Before that, he wasn't trying to win Josh Taylor's belts off of him. It's not his goal to establish himself as the best fighter in the sport, or one of the best fighters in the sport, his whole motivation is to sell tickets.
Hoodwink fight fans into thinking that he's fighting good fighters, when in reality,
They're matching him like a prospect, and just because some folks out there are willing to eat that up,
you can fool some people some of the time, but you can't fool everybody all the time.
you can't do it. Both Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Davis, both those guys, they're playing the same game, to where you can't ask them about fighting a Teofimo Lopez, a Vasyl Lomachenko, a Devin Haney. I'll go as far as saying you can't ask them about fighting a Shakur Stevenson. They're going to tell you they're not interested, even if they just so happen to have belts, championships, and world titles. Devin Haney's undisputed, but Ryan doesn't seem too concerned about that. He said he doesn't care about belts, and neither does Gervonta Davis. The only fight with a fighter on an opposing side of the street that either one of those guys are willing to entertain is a fight with each other.
And everybody knows that, so why has the media been playing the same game for all these years?
You don't need to ask Shakur Stevenson, Devin Haney, or Vasyl Lomachenko about a fighter like Gervonta Davis. You don't need to ask them about him. You need to ask him about them. If you're going to apply pressure on anybody.
Remember, these guys like to tell you that Gervonta Davis is the biggest name in boxing anywhere at or around 135 pounds.
That's what they tell you. So what you ought to do is ask him about those fighters the same way you like to ask Canelo Alvarez about David Benavidez and Jermall Charlo and Demetrius Andrade and Artur Beterbiev and a rematch with Dimitri Bivol. Go on, do
At the
it.
drop of a hat, Canelo Alvarez is regularly asked about 3 to 4 to 5 fucking fighters, all in different weight classes, all on different sides of the street.
This is on a regular basis, so why don't you keep that same energy for Gervonta Davis and ask him about Shakur Stevenson, ask him about Devin Haney, ask him about these fighters who are his contemporaries campaigning at or around the same weights as him. When does he plan on fighting them?
As far as I'm concerned, neither Shakur Stevenson or Devin Haney should ever mention Gervonta Davis in an interview. They might as well ignore him.
The interviewers themselves need to stop regurgitating the same questions for content, regurgitating the same questions they already know the answers to. If Gervonta Davis is the A-side fighter to these fighters, if he's a bigger draw at or around these weights than they are, then the onus to do a fight is on him, not them.
A-side calls the shots, right?
The A-side makes it happen, so when you see that Gervonta Davis isn't making it happen with a Devin Haney, with a Shakur Stevenson, with a Vasyl Lomachenko, why aren't you asking him about it? Why are you asking them? Why are you asking Shakur Stevenson about a Gervonta Davis fight when we all know he's receptive to a fight like that? The real question is, when will Gervonta be receptive to such a fight?
Or are you satisfied watching him smack around guys like Rolly Romero?
Throw your toys out the pram whenever somebody says that Gervonta's resume is paper thin, that he's a decent-looking fighter to the eye, but he doesn't fight anybody, so we don't really know what he is. This kind of stuff, it gets you upset because what you want is for the world to look at him through the same lens that you do, but they won't until he's fighting the likes of a Shakur Stevenson or a Devin Haney or a Vasyl Lomachenko. This kid, he's not a kid anymore.
He's 27 years old. They're still matching him like a prospect.
You're wasting your time and mine and Shakur Stevenson's with those rhetorical questions.
I don't fucking romanticize these guys.
There are a million stories in the sport of boxing just like his. What the hell does that have to do with the soft matchmaking we've been seeing for the last 4 going on 5 years? He comes from Baltimore, the streets of Baltimore. Oh my God, congratulations.
When are you gonna fight somebody?
What do you think? You're the first boxer that came from a poor neighborhood?
If I had a nickel.
Think that makes you special or something? Is his success story supposed to be an excuse for this soft matchmaking? Let me tell you something.
He can draw. And he's drawing what he's drawing with Isaac Cruz's and Rolly Romero's.
So how much more could he draw with a Devin Haney? How much more could he draw with a Shakur Stevenson? Don't believe the sales pitch. It's not that these guys don't bring something to the table. If you can get attention for your fight, even just a little, with a Rolly Romero, what kind of attention would a Shakur Stevenson get you? The reason they're avoiding those fights is because they're avoiding those risks.
And Shakur Stevenson as a fighter might feel so inclined to be diplomatic about it.
No, he didn't take a shot at Gervonta Davis, but I will, because I'm the paying customer. I'm the consumer.
I'm the one giving his particular product a product review.
You might have made some money off of some rubes that were interested in seeing you fight those no-hopers, but you won't get a red cent, not a dime of mine, fighting those guys.
I don't give a shit what your backstory is. I care about the fight.
What am I, this guy's fucking guidance counselor?
Spare me the sob story. Fight somebody who can fight back.
And finally, in men's welterweight news, Thurman considers catchweight fight with Lara, expects to return In October, it seems that the former unified welterweight champion is finally coming around to the idea of moving up in weight. Jaron Boots Ennis and Montes Stanionis wouldn't have anything to do with that, right?
Right.
If the right fight manifests in the upper divisions, I will consider it, Thurman told BoxingScene.com, specifying Lara for such a fight. It's funny, all this time I thought Erislandy Lara was still in the 154-pound division until someone explained to me that he's at 160. That's why they said he'd fight me at a catchweight. We haven't seen many fighters in history moving up from 147 to 160 and were successful. Taking on those historical challenges entices me more, and yet I vaguely recall Keith Thurman saying that he didn't intend on moving up in weight.
Yeah, I remember he said that a long time ago in an interview.
Something must have changed his mind. Perhaps it's the new cycle of unbeaten up-and-comers, the new cycle of welterweights coming through. Perhaps that's what sparked Keith Thurman's change of heart, as he's a prime target for an Montes Stanionis, a Jaron Boots Ennis, a Radzov Butaev.
A former champion who's a familiar face.
That's what it sounds like. We know he's towards the end of his career. I'm not saying his next fight will be his last one, but he definitely wants to go out with a name, acknowledges Thurman. He's someone I've known for many years. I've admired his boxing skills. I don't want to assume, but if we do try to assume, it seems like he wants to go out with a valid list of names before it's too late.
If we're gonna take things on assumption, Keith.
I think the only reason Keith Thurman's playing with the idea of fighting Lara at a catchweight is because he's hoping to drain him. He's hoping he arrives at that catchweight depleted, having already moved up in weight to middleweight. Thurman wants to fight an aging fighter at a weight that he hasn't made in a while.
He likes his chances under those circumstances better than taking on a guy who's all in his prime like a Jaron Boots Ennis.
Young guy, unbeaten guy who's looking to make a name for himself, and he's hungry. A hell of a lot more hungry than Keith's been the last couple of years. I'd wager the only reason that Keith Thurman is talking about moving up in weight is for the same reason that Danny Garcia's doing it. He's seeking refuge up there.
Biding his time, hoping he stays around long enough to catch a vacant title once one becomes vacant.
That's what Danny's doing. That's what I think Keith means to do. He wants to take on an aging Lara, or he'd prefer to, over a young unbeaten guy in his prime like a Jaron Boots Ennis who's looking to make a name for himself. In truth, I don't know if that's who Keith ends up fighting in October.
There's also the winner of Broner versus Figueroa to consider.
Because consider that even with all of those aforementioned factors, those circumstances, Keith Thurman still ain't a big guy, least of all at junior middleweight. Now, Erislandy Lara has a lot more experience at that weight. Even with all those things in mind, taking on Lara at junior middleweight is still a riskier endeavor than taking on the winner of Broner versus Figueroa, set to go down in August. The winner emerges in August, and they can perhaps take on Keith in October or November, because fight dates get pushed back all the time.
Supposedly, Crawford versus Spence did. They've moved off September onto October, and now it's November.
I don't got too much stock in what Keith says to interviewers these days. He's grasping at straws, trying desperately to stay relevant in a welterweight division that has forgotten him.
He's past the sell-by date.